So on the next slide, you're going to have a chance to see the sort of categories of actions that our action plan is organized around, particularly this conversation that's less about specific physical solutions that you can touch and more about ways that we're working together to advance our resilience. Mary, I'm still on the community guidelines slide. I know that
Oh, sorry, I was trying to make it bigger for folks and it looks like that went to the wrong screen. Okay.
So this is a slide that's got quite a lot of text in it. And I think, Mary, correct me if I'm wrong, it's where we're going to ask people to sort of offer some ideas for things that they definitely want to get a chance to talk about.
Yeah, exactly.
Is that there's columns here underneath these sort of color-coded bubbles. And each of these bubbles is an example of a kind of action. Outreach, education, and capacity building actions that have come up so far in our process are listed below, as well as policy and governance, service and program development types of actions for municipalities, nonprofits, agencies to develop, and emergency response and preparedness actions. And there's a few things to flag about this particular slide. The first is that we've been having community meetings for about 18 months, 2 years now. I can't quite keep track. And that means that we've been getting really great ideas throughout the process. Yes, this is better for me, so I appreciate that, Mary, checking in. And we wanted to, for folks that have been part of this conversation from some time now, we wanted you to be able to identify new actions, things that were coming up that have not been part of the slide deck in the past. For those of you who are new to the conversation, totally great, just recognizing that that's what the asterisks are for. New ideas since the last time we convened as a full region in February that are kind of grayed out that overlap, but they're specifically being discussed in the other breakout room. And so just, naming that some of those things are not going to be directly part of our conversation today. So Mary, what do you think? I'm going to suggest that people use the chat and sort of call out from where you can see in the screen. Thank you so much to the person who wanted to discuss stormwater first. So I assume that that's the number 3 under policy and governance that you're speaking about. But if you want to do something a little bit more specific, please feel free to mention that in the chat. Others who have sort of, a vote that they would like to name, and that we will do our best to sort of jump around the slides. We won't have time to talk about everything. We want to make sure we're meeting the interests of this group.
Should we start on stormwater then? Great.
Thank you.
Well, I can introduce this a little bit. And hi, everyone. Mary Kimball. I'm the planning and policy lead for the Arcadis team. So some of the things that we've heard so far about green infrastructure, as we talked about in the intro presentation, this region has a lot of impervious surfaces that contribute to runoff. And so this sort of green infrastructure and stormwater storage is really something that, we've found a good, real need for across the region. It also contributes to urban heat island impact. So another good reason to do green infrastructure. And so some of the things that we're looking at are strategies to increase installation of small scale green infrastructure really throughout the region, and also improving access and visibility of green infrastructure. And so on this slide, and this is sort of the format for all of the slides, so we can sort of explain that a little bit here. We've got various entities that we've identified specific actions for them to be implementing as part of this. So on this, we're saying as a recommendation to the whole region to develop a program structure and framework to provide funding and resources for green infrastructure on private properties. That could include rain barrels or tree planting or swales. Also to develop a regional training program for champions of green infrastructure, people that can be helpful to be implementing those projects really across the region, and to coordinate across municipality and CBOs, and also schools to support the implementation. And then looking to all of the cities and CBOs and academia to implement the program locally, and then looking for the state to provide funding and support for small scale green infrastructure really as part of the Resilient New Jersey program. And then we're looking for individuals, homeowners, property owners, even tenants as well, to look to implement green infrastructure projects at homes, and business owners as well. But it'd be great to hear from the folks interested in green infrastructure, like what are additional issues that you want to see addressed through green infrastructure? What are other outcomes that you want to see? And what do you think are other actions that we should be recommending to implement that? And even across the actions that I walk through, if there's anything that strikes out as a priority that you would want to make sure that we emphasize in the action plan. I see Chris has raised his hand.
Hi, this is Chris from Jersey City. I wanted to also add if I don't know if this was mentioned, this has been mentioned before. This is the first time that I'm coming to one of these meetings. But there's been like sorry. In Jersey City, there's been a lot of development for green infrastructure, and a lot of development has caused a lot of displacement. Rent prices have gone up in a lot of these places, and it's unfortunately there's a link being created between green spaces and gentrification and displacement, and we don't want that, right? We don't want to have green spaces to create that would increase rent prices, increase property prices, and make it unaffordable for people that have been living there. And how can we ensure that if these green spaces projects are implemented, that the folks that historically have lived there aren't displaced, or if the property, the property taxes don't go up, or the rent doesn't go up? What policies can we put in place to ensure that? Because they are the ones that need the green spaces the most, and it's not fair if they get a park and then they don't get to live around the park anymore. Thank you.
Yeah, no, great question. And it is something that has come up in some of our community sessions previously. I think, one of the things that we're talking about in terms of, recommendations around development policies is to, ensure that other policies are in place, to protect existing affordable housing and to increase the supply of affordable housing in redevelopment too. I think that's one sort of angle, and sort of, thinking about how we make sure that recommendations on addressing resiliency don't exacerbate other issues. But Natalie or Drew, if there's other things that you would want to add there too.
Yeah, it's a great question from Chris, and you definitely hit on the right answers, Mary, too. It's like we need to make sure that we're not just doing this resilience work in a vacuum. Our issues are intersectional too. We should be working to have strong anti-displacement policies in all of the 4 cities too. So making sure their rent control is as strong as possible and being enforced, as well as strong inclusionary zoning ordinances, which Newark is actually, under the leadership of Mayor Baraka, is currently strengthening that ordinance right now. That's in process. So hopefully the other cities can do that as well. Providing free legal representation through right to counsel, and really preserving our existing affordable housing too is really important too. So we need to make sure that the funds are coming down from the federal government and the state government as well to do that. Thank you. And then there's just one quick example that these issues are really going on at Terrell Homes public housing right on the banks of the Passaic River in the Ironbound section of Newark. That project is being preserved, but it's also being elevated too, so it won't be in a flood zone anymore too. So they're doing things the right way.
And if I could share, briefly, I think one of the program models that I've found most exciting in different parts of the country that have really strong green infrastructure programs underway already is ways that they use the experience and the activity of green infrastructure to spur really targeted economic development opportunities for small businesses and for residents to get, training, to get access to jobs for some of the projects. And so I think about, the work that's happened in Buffalo, the work that's happened in Cleveland and Northeast Ohio. And I think that's a lot of the spirit of what this goal is trying to get to. Because I'm a facilitator, I quickly jumped back to the main slide, but I don't think that there's anything named, and it might possibly go, Mary, under the service development the creation of, targeted workforce training programs and small business development programs to do the implementation work that's being named in the physical solutions, as well as the non-physical. But, we want to make sure that our residents and our businesses are able to reap some of the financial rewards of all of this investment that is happening in terms of making ourselves more resilient.
I see another hand from Nicole.
Hello. I feel like Natalie read my mind there a little bit, because the workforce was definitely going to be one of the questions. The other one is that this goal number 2 that's on the screen is for private property, small scale green infrastructure. Has there been discussion about sort of coordinating services through municipalities for large scale opportunities and on public property? So, targeting, of course, vacant and abandoned houses, low-lying areas, bringing in large property owners like the port, the airport, et cetera, to be able to maximize some of these currently fallow and or unused areas for helping to mitigate the stormwater issues. I don't know if that's, before I just came in like 10 minutes ago, so you might have already discussed it, or it might be somewhere else. But yeah, look. Goal 3.
Yeah, no, very good segue. Yeah, so we have also been looking at larger scale green infrastructure and the use of a publicly owned land. One tool that's been used across the region is the Green Acres program, which allows cities to, provides funding to acquire properties and implement green space. Something that, we found and what we've heard about in our process so far is that some of those processes with the Green Acres program can actually serve as barriers to including stormwater management within those parks. So that's something that we're looking into and have a recommendation to the state to really streamline those approvals. And then also looking at ways that existing open space can be used to manage large volumes of water. And actually in the other breakout room, there is probably a lot of discussion going on around some of the larger scale, like physical projects. But I think, one of the things that we've been looking at through on the policy side of it is, what are the sort of ways that the state can, streamline those approvals through the guidelines for projects. And also what are ways that the cities can include incorporation of stormwater management, like underground storage or wetland restoration. How can they incorporate that into park construction and renovation of projects? And then with CBOs and academia to continue to partner with municipalities to identify potential projects and implement projects. And it's something actually that Bayonne has done quite successfully at Fitzpatrick Park. And I think we have Sue here if you want to talk more about that, Sue. Didn't I see Sue join? She might have joined the other room.
Just I'm quick follow-up. Just to follow up on what's the sort of next step? Because this is like the last meeting. What's the
in terms of the next step, sorry, Nicole, I think you might have gotten cut off at the very end there.
Oh, I was just asking because this is like the last meeting. So what's the next step or resolution? How do we come back with answers, or, how do we know that we've accomplished these things? What's the kind of still in medias res, right? Like, so
yeah. Yeah, definitely. Really the end of our process is only the beginning, right? Then we come out with a draft plan this summer. There's opportunity to, comment on that plan, and then we'll have a final plan. And then, something that, we actually have another section of this deck that we could talk about is sort of, how do we continue the momentum of this program and really kind of continue to support the implementation of the planning process. So I think there's, we can move over to that unless there's anything more on green infrastructure that people want to focus on. Oh, Sue, did you want to talk about Bayonne, about Fitzpatrick Park before we move on?
Yeah, am I off mute?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, good. So, but I think the question that the lady just asked is really important. Like, what are the next steps? So I think, we should really think about that, because the one thing we don't want, the people who've been involved in this, we don't want it to stop. This is the beginning. We've gotten a great deal of information that's so useful for us, but we're trying to figure out how we go from here. So that's one thing. But on the Fitzpatrick Park project, we had a project where we were able to work with NJDP through the Community Collaborative Initiative, which is Alan Miller's. I don't think he was on earlier, but I'm not sure he's on this one tonight. And we were able to build a stormwater retention under the park, which would allow us to actually, get that water and then control it and then be able to release it at an appropriate time. And that was like 50% funded, with these grants. And we're going to use it as a model, because the problem that we all face in the region is that we have all this water. What do we do with it? So projects like this will allow us to store the water and then release it at times when it is appropriate without causing damage to the community. So it's very interesting that we were able to do it. We're very happy, and Resilience New Jersey and DEP really helped us with it. So we thank them for it.
Thanks, Sue. Can we just pause for a minute to switch the interpreters before moving on? Okay, we should be good. Thank you.
Well, then moving on to sort of this, concept of continuation of Resilient New Jersey, something that, we've been talking about is kind of, what are the different elements that we've been advancing through Resilient New Jersey, and what are the different sort of components of ongoing regional coordination? And what we've identified here is the need to continue to learn, to gather, share, and leverage information to improve resilience, the need to engage in providing a platform for inclusive and effective engagement across multiple scales, and also to share, to build momentum, shared political will, and advocate through a shared voice, and then also to act, to execute shared decisions and improve resilience across the region to climate resilience hazards. So there's a bunch of different, sort of specific actions within all of those things, but really what we're looking at is, what are sort of the needs in terms of continued coordination at this regional scale. I think that what's really unique about this program is, that we have all the municipalities and the county and the community-based organizations all kind of working together, and it's not always something that's possible within the existing governance that we have. And so what are sort of new forms of governance, new forms of coordination that are needed that could continue on after our planning process to really ensure the implementation of all the aspects of this plan. But anything else on that we should make sure to mention in terms of what we're looking at on regional coordination from other steering committee members, and any questions people have? Do people see the need for new forms of governance and coordinating bodies to make sure that these things sort of continue and have momentum? Or do we think there's existing bodies that should play that role?
Hi, sorry, I'm just jumping in, but
Yeah, please do.
my tendency is to not think that more government layers of governmental bureaucracy are helpful generally. So no, but that being said, a department that is specific with a specific goal, or a department taking on a specific role that's already existing. For example, in the city of Newark, the Department of Public Works currently handles removal of trees, but they don't have a tree department that's there to do the full comprehensive workup of trees. So that's managing and planting and maintaining and pruning and water, the whole gamut of trees, right? So I think it's more using what we have better as opposed to creating additional layers of bureaucracy.
Yeah, Nicole, it's really interesting to hear you sort of interpret it as a government agency, because I think it could be, but in a lot of ways, the models that I've seen from other parts of the country are sort of like voluntary collectives or coalitions, or, I mean, not everywhere, because there are definitely some areas where it looks more like a watershed board or something like that, like in Louisiana. But there are examples from Florida and where the commitments that are shared across, participating counties or municipalities or what have you, help to drive action because of the increased sort of power of voice beyond each municipality doing it on its own. And so I think, at least, speaking on behalf of the various steering committee members, that's the reason that we went after this grant from NJDEP. Thank you, NJDEP, for the funding together, was because we have so many assets of regional importance that we couldn't individually sort of create that space for shared advocacy and for shared sort of to be as protective as possible for our residents and vulnerable populations, and to recognize that we're of such great regional importance with transportation infrastructure, all these kinds of regional pieces of infrastructure that make us such a vibrant region. So how to do that is sort of the big question that we're grappling with. Part of the Arcadis project, just to finish that, is that they're looking at other case studies from across the country to see what we can learn and bring to New Jersey.
But just in response to that, and as well as anyone, that leaning too heavily on volunteers that's not the best either, because this should be someone's job. And if that means that there needs to be, thank you. If that means that it needs to be sort of coordinated across departments or through the county, and people are responsible to show up, at a round table, there can be volunteer engagement, and involvement and community stakeholdering, all of that involved, but this should be somebody's job. Personally, my thought.
Yeah, I think a related recommendation that that Drew just mentioned, skip over there maybe, unless there's any other thoughts on continuation of Resilient New Jersey. It's one of our other goals that we've been looking at is expanding municipal leadership and capacity to manage climate risk, to their point that this should be somebody's job. And something that, we've heard throughout this process that there really is a need for increased local staff and capacity to advance project and programs to, really see through the implementation of this. Some of the sort of hardest things that we've seen through this process too is just the magnitude of climate events, the risks that we're seeing for the future, but also just what has happened during the course of this project, that, this isn't something that municipalities have the capacity to be, addressing all the time. We've also heard that there's sometimes too many tools and sources for information, that sometimes there's not enough information, but sometimes there's too much duplicative information and people don't know exactly what information to get to. So we're looking at, through these goals to really, focus on the capacity that's needed to increase resilience, and also this idea of creating of a single source of truth for decision makers, sort of having one source of information on flood risk that everyone is using and everyone's going to, so people know that that's the one to be looking at. So some of the other recommendations here from the local side of things, that the local government is increasing staff dedicated to resilience, sustainability, and planning, like having a chief resilience officer, specifically having a portion of a budget addressed to resiliency, and also using, there's a lot of different, training places out there, and using the, trainings that are available to really, train staff on these issues. And then across the region, sharing resources and best practices across the region. I think something that has really been successful through this program is, really having, successes and lessons learned on resiliency planning being shared across municipalities within the region. We've also talked about a training exercise with emergency management, as well as with community-based organizations to practice disaster response. And then, something that we have as a recommendation for the state is to explore the development of a grant program to really support the hiring of resilient staff and the building of capacity. So just a few of those ideas, but I think, really kind of get to the, what's really needed to ensure the implementation of this at the local level. And really kind of, making sure that we have, not just the right plan, but we have a system of governance to really see through the implementation of it. I see a hand from Elizabeth.
Hi, you can call me Liz, please. So you foresee this municipal leadership as being statewide, or this would be a choice of each municipality to put in place? Would this be a legislative move, or would this be really local?
I think we were envisioning this as something that would just be applying to the cities within the region. But it's possible that it could be something that could be expanded statewide.
Okay. So it would be a matter of choice then. Cities could opt in or opt out.
Just as an example, Hoboken already has a chief resilience officer.
I know
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's a good question. Like I think I could see a model where also the state like mandates the creation of chief resiliency officers across the state. I think it'd be hard to do that without also them providing funding for that. But what do you think?
I think it's essential that this become a legislative action, that it become a statewide mandate. And the other thing I wanted to mention, I love the idea of local green champions. I think that should be a paid position. I think that folks should be locally trained to educate the population of each municipality as to how to live and use better green practices, and then how to react and survive in challenging situations. I think that's such a terrific idea.
Yeah, there has been this idea of like the ambassadors. I think we have something on that too.
Like Hoboken, and I know Jersey City also has a green team, but it's a volunteer program and we don't really cover these huge issues. We talk about things like recycling and composting, but we don't really talk about resiliency issues. So I think these should be, the green ambassadors should be paid, trained professionals who know how to deal with emergency situations, but also can go around educating people about climate change and how to live in a more green way and sustainable way.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, I was mentioning we have talked about kind of having like an outreach ambassador program. I think we've talked about it sort of like focus on sort of outreach to specifically vulnerable and at-risk populations to ensure that people are aware of like emergency planning efforts. But I think that idea of kind of making sure that, or sort of broadening this to think about sort of green infrastructure, sustainability more broadly is a good idea.
For example,
go ahead, Liz. Go ahead, Liz.
Well, we had several years ago, we had the rain barrel program, but I didn't know how to install one. Like the city was willing to give me a free rain barrel, but I didn't have the capacity to install it, the capacity or the knowledge to install it. So I never got it. So if we had people like green ambassadors who could help people to install the green infrastructure that would help the city become more resilient and sustainable, it would be incredibly helpful. And if they were people from the environmental justice community who were paid to do these jobs, it would also, I think, in a small way at least, stop the green movement from becoming a gentrification process, because it would help people from all different parts of our community be buying into the fact that this is a community effort. We're all in this together and we're all going to suffer from what's happening with climate change. I'm done.
Yeah, so true.
I could go on all night. I'm done.
Natalie, was there something else you wanted to mention there?
I just think that it's so interesting what I'm hearing from Liz's comments because they show up in a couple different places for the ideas that we've been sort of playing with in terms of this action plan. If you jump to the sort of resilience hubs or the increasing resident, access to information about resilience, like there's a few areas in that like purple section that kind of speak to this, even though it's not. You're giving me lots of ideas and way of thinking about how to operationalize something like this. There's a few different models that are used for really specific topics. There's community health workers. In Newark, we have green infrastructure reformers. I know that around the country, there's a lot of folks that use the things that they call ambassadors to advance different things. Like there's the Master Gardener program that like, these are all examples of things that are very specific topics, but I don't think we have an equivalent that's in the resiliency space or necessarily in the like broad umbrella sustainability space. And I see you nodding, Liz, so I'm curious for like thoughts that I'm generating with the comments.
Well, I'm also thinking there could we have political committees that are like ward captains. Like I'm a ward captain. We could have green captains for blocks, like a block captain for each block, who's helping to make sure or helping to educate people about options that they have, or helping to make sure that people understand the recycling rules. So many people don't. Helping to show people how easy it is to compost, for example, or looking into ways, many of us live in aging buildings in these cities. Maybe there are ways we could have shared solar capacity on the roofs of our buildings, or maybe there are ways that we could have rooftop gardens. If we had these green ambassadors who had the time and ability to do the research that most of us don't have, maybe more of the green, local, small green infrastructure could be implemented. But these should be, I think, paid positions, and they should be done by people from all walks of life who may be looking for meaningful employment. And if we had, like there used to be safety watch groups on blocks, we could now have green committees for each block, and people interested in environmental issues could join, but they could be led by a paid green ambassador for their community. I love this idea. I'm going to bring it up at the green team meeting in Hoboken.
No, that's great. Maybe I'll go back to sort of like our overall list and just see if there's other things that people want to make sure that we touch on.
Can I just briefly talk about one more thing? Like many of us lived through Sandy, and the way we all came together here in Hoboken, and I'm sure it was the same in Bayonne and Jersey City and North Bergen and all the communities, and Newark and Essex and Hudson County. I mean, we had to help each other out. And so these kind of disasters, as we've been mentioning, are going to happen more and more. And how helpful would it be if we knew we had these committees, community committees that we could go to in disaster situations, as well as turn to when we needed information about how to look for green alternatives for problems that we have. How can we put an electric charging station on our block? Who do we go to talk to about those kinds of things? If we had a green ambassador to look into that stuff for us, I think it would be phenomenal. But the person's got to be paid.
Yeah, definitely seems sort of related to the, local capacity. So maybe that's like sort of another way to build that in a little bit more.
You have your chief resiliency officer, but under that person, I think there should be, a whole network of green ambassadors who carry out the resiliency officers' directives.
Yeah. So one of our area of recommendations that we
Mary.
haven't, oh,
We
sorry.
pause for the interpreter switch.
Yep.
Sorry about that. Okay, we should be good. Thank you.
I want to talk about the art program too.
Okay, great. Yeah, I was going to say we haven't quite, we haven't touched on many of our outreach, education, and capacity building, sort of more on the community outreach side of things. So maybe we could talk about.
We actually have Delilah on the line, I think. Delilah, do you want to come off mute and talk a bit about what we're working on?
Sure. So I've developed a concept for interactive murals that incorporate the faces and the voices leading the environmental justice and climate change spaces from each of the 4 communities, while also expressing the goals that are at the heart of Resilient. My goal is to make the murals interactive through the addition of QR codes that will then lead viewers to a landing page where they'll have access to clear and easy to digest content that explains Resilience plans and goals, video interviews that detail why Resilient is so necessary to our communities, and also downloadable worksheets that parents and teachers would be able to give to their students to increase awareness, knowledge, and community involvement. And throughout the entire process of these murals, we're going to be incorporating community-based artists, youth organizations, and other community members. So we're really focusing on engagement of the community from, I mean, all aspects. So I hope that explains everything. If anybody has any questions.
Oh, it's so exciting.
Delilah, it's Liz again. I'm actually on the Hoboken Arts Advisory Committee, but I have to go to our meeting. I'm an hour late for it in a minute. Can you give me your contact information?
Of course. Yeah, I'll DM it to you now.
Thank you.
But yeah, so this public art program is just sort of, one of the things that we're already, starting to do to really advance this goal around increasing community preparedness and awareness. Just to touch on a few other things that we've got in the works, we're developing a video series on, Resiliency 101. We've also been doing some youth engagement, and we're also working on an advertising campaign that will actually be on New Jersey Transit and PATH. And there's few additional sort of things in terms of like sharing stories of people, the Faces of Resiliency campaign. Been going to the high schools. So a bunch of stuff already in the works, but really, I think this is something that we see as a real need to continue to increase awareness of, resiliency more broadly and empowerment. I think, one of the things that we want to make sure comes out of this is that, people feel prepared and know what to do in times of needs and emergency situations, but also people are actively engaging in the sort of the long-term planning and efforts like this and sort of seeing through these initiatives. So we're, looking at this sort of like Resilience 101 campaign, also looking to, publish more information on city websites about resiliency as well as other capital improvement projects, partnering with community-based organizations in terms of distribution of those materials. And then also this idea of kind of creating more of a single source of truth to sort of reconcile potentially duplicate sources of information and having a sort of single source of information where people should go. But it'd be great to, get some input from people in terms of, who are the audiences that we should be trying to reach? What is the sort of information that we should be making sure we're communicating, and then, what are the right mediums? How can we reach people?
One of the things that I'll name here, and it came out of our first couple community meetings, was how important it was for people to see, because of, I guess I can name any number of things, but between the digital divide, between the prevalence of social media among some generations and not others, between language, justice, and access issues, One of the pieces that's been actually surprisingly hard for me is to determine how to get flyers onto lampposts and community bulletin boards. And this project has tried so hard to be present in that way. But it's part of what we need is literally like, old back in the day church phone trees and, flyers on bulletin boards at the grocery stores. And it seems like a really simplistic thing, but there was a Facebook post that just ran around recently where it was like, resource sharing and sharing tools and sharing information. And that's like literally information, resilience defined in my book, the on the ground block by block level community building that allows us to really be strong after disasters.
Yeah, and you're seeing some
that like the awareness building literally needs to include the development of pamphlets and brochures. We got to be old school as well as being like super innovative and having concepts.
And yeah, you're seeing some of it's a little bit messy since these are some of our notes from the earlier meeting tonight, and some of the feedback that we heard before is like, it's good to focus on social vulnerable populations, lower income, minority communities and seniors, but not necessarily to be like geographically focused, to really recognize that people, live throughout the communities. Heard a lot about the importance of having information available in multiple languages, which is something that we've tried to do as much as possible throughout this program. I think we've identified 10 languages priorities for translation. And then, I think we did hear a lot in the last group too about, reaching out to houses of worship, neighborhood associations, in addition to that kind of, old-fashioned physical outreach.
Well, just talking about emergency preparedness, which I know is a different sort of group, but that's another function of the municipal governments, right? So having the sort of like baseline communication, and then what are the trees that you use to sort of like reach those people who are not generally reachable. There's mechanisms already in place for municipalities to do that kind of emergency preparedness, to have those planning, even to do sort of drills and things like that. And also for people to know about the potential dangers, right? So I might get an alert from the National Weather Center about the Passaic, flooding, but that's not affecting me up in the west ward of Newark, but it might be affecting people down, not even might, it definitely is affecting people down in the east ward. And so how are we making sure that the people who need to know about the imminent dangers are aware, and what are the safe routes out, and sort of preparing for all of that. That's again, a function of government, not necessarily something that individual people, even though individual people should have a plan, but the municipality should not be at a loss during those times of emergency.
Yeah, and emergency response and preparedness actually is something that, initially wasn't really a focus of this program, but, because of storms that happened during it, and just like hearing that this was a concern and interest of people through our outreach, we did. It has been something that we've been exploring. So we do have several goals around emergency preparedness that includes, things like warning systems, like you were mentioning, also like immediate, sort of like coordination of responses during flood events between, OEM departments and other programs. And then, also on the sort of recovery side about financial assistance for recovery. I think, something that, we've heard a lot about is, people didn't necessarily know what was going to happen with Ida. I can speak for myself on that too. And we've also heard that some community members are harder to reach through some of these typical alert systems. There's been, we've talked a lot about, ways of engaging the deaf community is really sort of a major priority that needs to be addressed. And some of those messages from National Weather Service that you were mentioning, but also ways of, tying those alerts to, reporters and other community science initiatives. And also, other approaches like, adding the warnings on like the transportation systems or like the highway signs, door knocking, social media, radio, getting it out through other mediums. Anything on emergency response that Natalie or Drew, you want to make sure we mention?
I'm sort of bringing forward other comments from previous meetings, but I really, really appreciated the comments around, making sure that we're providing information that's available to the deaf community and information that's available to folks with different kinds of either access or functional or limited mobility needs. And I got a chance to see a presentation from somebody who advocates for the blind, and the numbers that she was sharing in terms of people with, these kinds of disabilities were really striking. And just kind of wanting to name that here, that our warning systems, I think I'll just say for myself, I feel very strongly that our solutions need to serve those that are worst off first and most effectively. And that is part of how I think about, the need for additional studies and the need for really engaging in, I'm going to throw out a big term here, but I really love it, targeted universalism. I'll drop a link in the chat for folks that aren't familiar with the term.
We'll bring us back to our long list. If there's anything that pops out in here that people want to talk more about, or or do we see anything missing too?
4-minute warning, just a reminder too. So
Thanks, Drew.
what are those things that we missed during this process?
One thing we didn't touch too much on was the contaminated sites. Something that we've been looking into more throughout this process is, really, as we saw in the intro presentation, really the high exposure to contaminated sites across this region, and the sort of relationship between that and potential flood hazards too. So something that we've been looking at is different ways of accelerating the transformation of contaminated sites. There are existing databases and state funding programs, but really sort of advancing those to, really sort of prioritize those sites for things like the green infrastructure or open space, things that are needed, but then also that, that allows them to, remove the contamination. So that when and if flooding does happen, that we sort of remove those potential spread of those contaminants.
Mary, the other thing I want to just highlight there when we're talking about toxic flooding, it's great to focus on repurposing these sites, but while it's happening, we need to have better government response to do testing of floodwaters. After Sandy, in Ironbound, which the eastern end got decimated, it took 2 weeks for the EPA to come out. The DEP didn't refuse to come out at the time. That was a different gubernatorial administration, as I'm sure we recall. But and by the time the testing wasn't conclusive because the water had become too stagnant. So we really need, as part of emergency response, that needs to be testing of floodwaters for the water quality and so forth too. And it's not just from contaminated sites, but also active industrial sites. In a lot of our communities, industry sits right next door to residential homes too. And so the flooding is happening there too.
Hey, Drew, this is Alan Miller, DEP.
Hey.
I'm curious. I wasn't at DEP during Sandy. I was at another state agency, but I'm curious about the comment that you just made that DEP wouldn't come out to test for 2 weeks after Sandy occurred, and you said that with a lot of assurity. How do you know that? I mean, or were you involved in getting them out there?
We were, because we saw the issue when it happened right after the storm. And we reached out to both DEP and EPA. We're trying to get them out there now too. And again, I think it was a different administration.
It was a different, and I'm familiar with that administration as well as this one and the one before the last one. But I'm curious as to who you reached out to at DEP, because I'd like to follow up on that comment. And I want to internally find out why DEP did not respond in the way that they theoretically should have responded. And if they didn't, since they didn't respond, why not? And I think the group deserves that answer. So I'd appreciate you sending me any information you have about that outreach back then. So
I
I
will
can
have to look back in my emails to see if I can find it.
All right. I
Who it
mean,
was.
I'll talk internally with our brownfields program and our site remediation program. And actually, one of my colleagues led the charge along the coast, along the East Coast, for the rebuild. And he's a site remediation person. So I'll follow up on my end, but I'm very curious as to who at DEP and what programs categorically said they wouldn't come out to test and why.
Yeah. It may have been simple. They didn't have the capacity. It could have been.
It may have been. And, I just, as I said, I think the group deserves to know why. And I think if there were issues that, DEP has explanations for, that those explanations should be put forth as well. So it doesn't appear as though that the department just didn't care. And didn't come out and
I
do
didn't
it.
bring this up, Alan, to place blame.
I know you didn't, but
this is
since
all
my
about,
program is in site remediation, it concerns me.
Understood. Yeah, this is more about let's making sure we're better moving forward.
Exactly.
No, it wasn't a blame statement. I apologize.
I did not say it was. I'm just curious because I want to make sure that it doesn't happen again.
Understood. We're on the same page there.
That's
I'll see what I
actually,
can do.
yeah, we're all on the same page there. I was gonna suggest, Mary, since I know that we're at, the top of the hour in our scheduled time, there was a lot happening in the chat, and it would be really great to just create some airspace for folks that didn't get a chance, but, shared some information in the chat to offer their opinions off mute. I'm like slowly trying to skim through them, but right from the very beginning of the meeting, there was Pankaj shared some notes. I know, I think Brett moved over to the other session.
Yeah, Faith, I saw comments in there from you.
Faith added some comments. Would any of you, if you're still with us, like to unmute and, make some comments or share some thoughts with your own voice?
Hi, everyone. This is Pedro from Jersey City. I used to live over in Bayonne. Now I'm over here, and I'm actually surprised at the amount of progress we've done on this thus far. I've seen some of the green architecture, some of the solar panels we're installing around the city. I agree somewhat with the gentrification aspect and the delicate balance that is building new and repairing what exists, which might not be ideal. I would like to emphasize the need for vertical or more environmental solutions. That does include better composting and better agricultural, economical, I'm not sure how to describe it, but better practices around that area. So I'm actually I don't have any comment or anything additional to add except gratitude. Thank you for doing all this and trying to figure it out despite it needing a lot of interest and attention from people who might be otherwise busy. So I just came here to say thank you.
Well, thank you for joining.
Hi, this is Faith from Jersey City. I'll just come off mute and show my face to say thank you as well.
And is Tamisha still with us? Because I see that you also had a good series of ideas there. If you'd like to share some of your priorities, any top concerns you have, we'd love All right, I see a hand, Mary, and then I will invite you to close us out. Nicole, can you hear, do you want to go? I'm not sure if my mic is close enough. Nicole, go ahead.
Yeah, I saw Tamisha put a note in the chat there just to say thank you. Just in response to the question I think Mary had asked about, or maybe it was Drew, about what I didn't see. I really appreciate the point about the contaminated sites and brownfields, but that's like there's a whole infrastructure there around not just the cleanup, but then the remediation and reuse of all those spaces. That's really important. But two things that I thought were a little lacking, of course, was the workforce component and really sort of the full range of involvement with regard to workforce, from not only working for the city, but also expanding entrepreneurial focus, training people, educating them on the issues, and then putting them on a preferred vendor list at the state, county, and municipal level so that people know, for example, at my home, I want to have green infrastructure done. How do I reach out to someone who I know has been trained on this? Like, what's the outreach strategy there for consumers to be able to, or for homeowners and property owners to be able to access knowledgeable people? That's something that right now we don't have that direct avenue where I could go to, a city or municipal or a state website and say, oh, this is a green infrastructure professional that I can reach out to. So having preferred vendors list is important, but then also incentives. So tax incentives, purchasing incentives, group buying, those kinds of things I didn't really see brought together, so that if I get, 10 of my neighbors, we can all get, whatever, some kind of green infrastructure or some kind of resiliency installation done, or something like that, when we're talking about private property. And those are all things that should be accessible, not only for the residents and the property owners, but also online, sorry, but also on some sort of website, whether that's a municipal or state or county website, but somehow accessible, and going through those networks like the ambassadors that was mentioned, which is a great idea. But definitely incentives and the workforce pipeline are two things that I would like to see more discussed.
Great, thank you. That's really helpful. So yeah, we're a little bit over, so I'll close this out. Just a few of our next steps. Look out for our flood impact assessment and climate hazards coming soon. Later this summer, you'll see the draft action plan. You'll also see more on our outreach and engagement and the community art stuff going on, as well as our continued discussions of Resilient New Jersey. And then feel free to, continue to share your thoughts with us anytime, even though this is the last planned, big virtual community meeting that we're doing. That doesn't mean that we just don't want any more feedback. And so please, reach out to us through our website, through our hotline, via email. There's a lot of stuff on our website about the project that you can provide additional feedback on. And so yes, follow us and keep giving all this input, because it's really, it's been through these meetings, through these engagements with people like you, that's really, developed this plan. So thank you all for participating so far, participating tonight, and I hope you'll continue to. And I want to thank the steering committee meeting members here, Natalie, Drew, Sue. These people have been amazing. You are all lucky to have such great public servants and community groups in your region. These people have been amazing and are doing so much work on this project. And thank you also to NJDPS, who said also in the chat, for providing the framework for this and really making this planning process happen. So thank you, Nick. And everyone, have a good night. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you, interpreters.